Are you a stakeholder in the construction industry? Ever wondered how you can give back to the community using your main products and services? Or are you a nonprofit involved in building structures and facilities aimed at helping the poor and overcoming poverty? FairBuilding Network is an organization aimed at creating a more socially inclusive construction market. Over 2 billion people live in poverty, every single one aspiring to have a home. But projects for the poor don't register on the radar of the building industry. Projects are scattered, often hidden away, and individually, they don't add up to much. Together, we can create this change. We have it in us to think smartly and to bring today the experience and track record to help less fortunate people while growing our industry. It can be a win-win proposition. It is a fact that there is a market in building for the poor. The question is, how do we bring together project developers and building sector suppliers to create mutually beneficial business opportunities? The answer is BCI's FairBuilding Network website, which hosts a central database where building sector suppliers can find a wealth of social project opportunities in the Philippines and soon all over Southeast Asia. Our mission? Creating a new workplace, enabling construction with a conscience, overcoming poverty one project at a time. FairBuilding Network is a platform showcasing projects benefiting the poor, which will ultimately host well over 100,000 projects. The process is simple. Literally anyone that is building a project that will benefit the poor can go to the FairBuilding website and submit a project, which becomes a business opportunity. FairBuilding partners, suppliers of the building industry who sign up to the FairBuilding Network are basically saying, I want to do well by doing good. I want to help make these projects happen. These suppliers sign a commitment form affirming their willingness to give discounts or donations for construction materials and services needed by FairBuilding projects. The FairBuilding database runs an automatic query matching projects with partners. FairBuilding partners then receive an automated email with contact details of the social developers that require their products and services. Alternatively, they can log on anytime to search for new opportunities for their business. Any social developer can also take action by searching the FairBuilding database for partners who have an interest in supplying to social projects and contact them proactively. FairBuilding Network also conducts engagement forums to bring these key stakeholders in one room. Through engagement forums, the social developers are given the spotlight to present their construction projects before FairBuilding industry partners. The FairBuilding Network is a social marketplace facilitating collaboration to help improve the life of those less fortunate while creating business opportunities. To be part of the FairBuilding Network, visit their website and click on Get Involved. It only takes a couple of minutes to build a better life for people less fortunate than us around the world.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ayn Rand Parel. I'm the Administrative Manager from the FairBuilding Network.
And I am Hershey Gabi, also from the FairBuilding Network. And we will be your hosts and moderators for today's online forum called A Ladder Up, the construction sector's role in rebuilding emerging market economies, presented by Habitat for Humanity's Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter in partnership with the FairBuilding Network and Habitat for Humanity Philippines.
We're truly glad to have all of you with us today as we celebrate World Habitat Day and Urban October through this forum. In this online event, we shall be talking about the recently launched A Ladder Up report by Habitat for Humanity through the Terwilliger Center. The study offers interesting insights on the linkages of the construction sector to the rest of the economy and its impact on employment, especially in an emerging market economy like the Philippines. We're very fortunate to have two of the study's co authors to share these highlights with us. By joining us today, you also affirm that inclusive housing and fair building should really be at the forefront of our priorities. So, thank you very much for your presence. Addressing the country's housing gap could be a main driver for economic recovery, especially in the number of jobs the construction sector produces every year.
That's right, Miss Ayn. This forum will also feature a panel of experts from the construction labor sector to discuss challenges and opportunities in providing jobs to workers as a way to hasten economic recovery. We also hope to close this discussion with all of us learning how we can further explore viable, inclusive, and mutually beneficial business solutions and opportunities on the construction sector, with particular focus on affordable housing. We want this forum to be engaging, so we encourage you to share your questions through the Q&A panel. Feel free as well to share your comments on the chat box. We'll also be asking some questions to the audience and give away prizes, so we look forward to that later on.
All right. To start off this event, please welcome the chairperson of Habitat for Humanity Philippines National Board of Trustees and Chief Operating Officer of MegaWorld Corporation, Ms. Lourdes Gutierrez Alfonso.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It is of great joy that I welcome you to the virtual celebration of the World Habitat Day and Urban October, organized by Habitat for Humanity Philippines and Habitat's Terwilliger Center in partnership with the FairBuilding Network. World Habitat Day is a day to reflect on the state of our habitats and the fundamental right of all to an adequate shelter that unfortunately not everyone enjoys. This day is also intended to remind us that we all have the power and the responsibility to shape the future of our cities and towns through housing and sustainable development. At this celebration, it is but timely and essential to spotlight and discuss the construction sector's role in rebuilding emerging market economies. As outlined in Ladder Up report released by Habitat's Terwilliger Center, the report reflects the Philippine situation for the construction industry, particularly the housing industry, often overlooked or undervalued as a source of jobs and long-term livelihoods for workers with low-level formal education. Within the construction industry of the Philippines, it is estimated that there are 4.7 million people formally employed, excluding the substantial informal employment, which is significantly higher. Moreover, government data shows that housing production has a multiplier effect on the economy. And for every job created in the sector, 2 more jobs are created in the economy. This information, which points to the importance of housing and housing investment in rebuilding market economies, will further be supplemented in the report that we will hear today from the Arthur Accolin of the University of Washington. And in the discussion from our panel of reactors, the data is undeniable. Housing construction and investment in housing lead to economic development, employment, livelihood, better health, improved educational output for children, and financial stability for families. However, with the current housing gap of 6.5 million housing units, This problem is too huge for anyone, not even the government, to solve alone. With the pandemic now and more than ever, the government, private sector, and organizations should invest more in safe, affordable, and disaster-resilient housing to spur economic development. Moreover, we need a facilitating environment conducive for anyone to invest and participate in housing production, to enable families to access affordable, innovative, and sustainable and resilient housing. As we celebrate World Habitat Day, let us be reminded that every Filipino has the right to live in a safe and decent home, that the government has an obligation to provide access to adequate and affordable housing, and that individually and as Christians, we have the power and the responsibility to help our brothers in need. I look forward to an exciting and immensely important discussion. And on behalf of the organizations that collaborated to organize this event, I now open the floor for the presentation of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lu. At this point, let us hear from a group of experts who will present to us the study launched by Habitat for Humanity on World Habitat Day. The report, titled A Ladder Up, the construction sector's role in creating jobs and rebuilding emerging market economies, reveals how the construction industry, led by home building, has become a large, often overlooked source of jobs in emerging market economies, especially in the Philippines.
All right, to give us more insight into the study, please help me welcome the co-authors of the Ladder Up report. First, we have Assistant Professor and Bob Philly Endowed Chair in the Ronstadt Department of Real Estate in the College of Built Environments at the University of Washington, Dr. Arthur Acolin. His research focused on understanding market and policy barriers to providing adequate and affordable housing for all income segments, particularly in the context of economies with constrained mortgage markets. Joining him is the director of the International Housing Finance Program at the Wharton School Zell Lurie Real Estate Center and an adjunct professor in the Wharton Real Estate Department at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Maria Hooksmith. Maria teaches executive education programs in housing finance and housing market analysis and is a frequent advisor to governments and private and nonprofit sector clients in emerging market and developing countries in the field of housing and housing finance policy, institutional and product development. She is a member of the advisory board of the Habitat for Humanity Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Housing and the executive director of the Housing Finance Information Network, a global web portal that consolidates international housing finance information and statistical data for public use. Arthur and Maria, thank you again for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Good morning. We are really excited to be here and share with you this new report by TCIS. It looks at who works in the construction sector and how construction workers can contribute to the economic recovery in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And for most of you here today, the importance of housing and the construction sector is an essential part of your work and your mission, but still too often it's overlooked by government and by the private sector, and particularly lower income segment is not adequately served, and affordable and adequate shelter remain out of reach for many households. Next. So in this sector, we really want for this report to focus on the economic role of the sector and provide some basic descriptive facts about the worker who contribute to it and the economic impact of supporting the construction sector. As many economies look toward recovery from the disruption brought by the COVID pandemic, construction in the housing sector can have an important role for economic stimulus while addressing the long-term housing needs that many countries face, as well as meeting several of the sustainable development goals regarding housing condition and energy consumption. This report built on previous work by TCIS published last year that showed that the contribution of housing to the GDP is really large using official numbers, and is likely to be quite undercounted for various reasons, partially due to the size of the informal sector. And housing importance goes beyond its role as a job creator. It includes how it affects local financing as well as its social impact in terms of health, education, and labor productivity. But in our work for TCIS for the last report, the Cornerstone report, and in this new report, the Ladder Up, we really want to highlight the contribution of housing to the economy and how investing in housing has those broader economic impact. Next page. So in our previous study, we had found that housing investment, so the amount that we spend into construction and creating more housing represent about 2 to 7% of GDP, generally around 4 to 6% in many countries. So that's a substantial share, but what is often undercounted and not perceived as important is the rent we pay every month, or the mortgage payment we make every month, the value of the housing services we derive when we own our house, that if it was self-built or bought with cash, the value of those services represent around 10% or more of GDP. And so combined, housing is about 15 to 16% of GDP in many countries. And that measure represents an undercount in many emerging market economies where the informal housing sector is large and often undercounted in national accounts. And then next slide, please. So in our report for TCIS last year for 11 countries, you can see India, the Philippines, or Indonesia are in that range of about 12–14% of GDP represented by housing. So that means that in the measure of GDP, housing is about a sixth of the overall economy, which is a really large share that is often overlooked. But in addition, one of the things that we argue in that Cornerstone of Recovery report, next slide, please, is that if the informal sector was adequately accounted for, that number would generally be about 1 to 1.5 percentage points higher, which is a substantial increase in GDP that would be permanent going forward. Next slide, please. In this new Ladder Up report, we focus on the construction sector in 9 countries, including the Philippines, India, and Indonesia. The construction sector is really an important source of employment. We find that for the country, including in the report, it's about 5 to 10% of the overall workforce, and it's often one of the largest sectors after agriculture. And it's particularly important because construction workers are largely employed informally and predominantly have relatively limited level of formal education. And so what we argue in the report, and the reason why it's called the Ladder Up report, is that construction can represent this first step onto the urban job market for rural migrant or for individuals with limited formal education in the urban job market. And so it's a particularly important sector for that reason. I will come back to those figures, but just highlighting some of the main findings with regard to those multiplier effect on the overall economy and in terms of additional job created for every new job in the construction sector. But we'll come back to those figures later on. Next slide, please. So those graphs, just to situate a little bit in international context. On the left, you can see the construction sector as a share of total employment. This is for all construction work. Those figures are from the ILO that gather them from individual countries, and they have been standardized, so they're comparable. You can see that in many regions, it's about 6 to 8% of the workforce that works in construction. It's quite a bit higher in some of the South Asian and Middle East and Northern African countries, where there is really a lot of construction activity happening in recent decades, and where construction is up to 10% or more of the workforce. But you can see that for Southeast Asia, for North America, or for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's around that 6 to 8% range, and that's the situation as well for the Philippines. And so in the Philippines, it's when you look at construction for building in particular, so not including large infrastructure projects, bridges and things like that, just looking at building construction, the orange line, the construction sector represents about 7% of overall employment, which is large. Next slide, please. And so that's just showing the same graph with a bit more details. And you can see that construction is really that relatively stable share of the economy in many countries. As I mentioned earlier, India has particularly large share of its workforce in construction at the moment, reflecting the rapid urbanization and the growth of many urban areas that require a lot of new building and new housing. But in all countries, it's at least 4% of the workforce, with Uganda having the smallest share. Next slide, please. When thinking about who works in construction, those will probably not be very surprising findings for most of you involved in this field, but construction workers are predominantly male, more than 90% in all countries, including in the Philippines. That said, given the size of the construction sector, if 10% or less are women, that still means hundreds of thousands of women who work in the construction sector and need to be better included in many cases and have career trajectories that are more similar to men, which has not been the case based on some of the ILO work that shows that women tend to stay in lower paid occupation that are quite hazardous in many cases. And that's in part also because construction workers are often employed informally. The ILO database doesn't have data for the Philippines for informal workers, although some data exists, and it's in similar magnitude, around 60%. And that's what is found in many of the countries that we're including in the report, where more than 60% of construction workers work in the informal sector and employed informally. That said, next slide, please. Many of those workers are working for small contractors or are self-employed. And so that informal employment with relatively small firms or small subcontractors, that create both some challenges and some opportunity. It creates some challenges for implementing regulations, for improving skills and creating some formal programs, since those companies are not set up for that or self-entrepreneur. But it also creates opportunities for entrepreneurship. And there are some really important success stories of people who have gone into construction, developed skill, created their own companies and found financial and economic success in that trade. And so that employment sector being very fragmented, very small scale, represents important challenges, but it's also an important opportunity for innovation. Next slide, please. When looking at the educational attainment and the age of construction worker, one of the things that jumped out is that relative to the overall workforce, construction workers tend to have lower level of educational attainment. But one of the potential image of the construction worker being relatively young, in their 20s, partially because it's arduous work, physical work, is really not found in the data for the countries, including in our report. And we find that on average, construction workers are 35 to 40 years old, and that tends to be at least as high as the overall workforce. So the construction sector is really employing people over the long run, and we need to create careers that allow them to keep working in safe and healthy conditions over their life cycle. Next slide, please. So having given this kind of broad overview of the size of the construction sector and who construction workers is, in the report we turn to trying to estimate what's the economic impact of increasing construction activity. And we use two main measures that are relatively technical, but to summarize them, the first one, the output multiplier, measures the impact of increasing at the margin construction output by 1 unit. So let's say by $1 million in increased housing or construction production. What is the impact on the overall economy? So that multiplier effect. And what we find is that in the countries studied, it's about 1.5 to 2 in most cases. So for each additional output in construction that increase overall economic output by about another 0.5 to $1 or $1 million. When looking at employment, which is particularly important, not only is the construction sector rich in employment, but it also generates additional work, both upstream and downstream, through all of the input that are required in construction, in producing the material, in producing the sites and all of it is associated with construction, but also the downstream effect of needing more furniture, needing more services, needing more appliances and utilities in order to service those new buildings. And so those employment multiplier are fairly large. As was mentioned in the introduction, for each additional job in construction, you get an additional 1.5 to 2 jobs, which again is a particularly important aspect of investing in housing, investing in construction to stimulate the overall economy in this time of economic challenges in the aftermath of the COVID-19 induced pandemic and recession. Next slide, please. And to kind of summarize those numbers on a $1 million basis, if you think about what happened if you spend or you create an additional $1 million in construction output, we find that decomposing both direct and indirect effect, it creates about 60 to 180 jobs. In the Philippines, it's 165 jobs. So those are really large numbers. And to be clear, this means that if you have 1 million in output, you're employing 165 persons for a year through that additional output. About half of it coming directly from people working in the construction sector, but another 50% to as many or more, depending on the country, working in those induced jobs, those indirect employment effects I mentioned earlier. And so those numbers are really quite important to indicate that supporting the housing sector, supporting construction can have those large economic benefits. Next slide, please. So summing it up, what we find, one of the really, I think, important thing to highlight is that the construction sector in many countries has been lagging in productivity gain. There has been very limited growth in our ability to deliver housing more effectively, to decrease the relative cost of housing, and that in part because of that lack of productivity gain. The Economist a couple of years ago had this global comparison, and you find the same thing in many countries, from the US to India to Europe, where global productivity for the construction sector was lagging behind overall productivity gain, and other sectors like manufacturing quite dramatically. And so finding ways to innovate in the shelter production space, finding ways to meet those challenges so that we are able to meet housing needs and retrofit existing buildings is really an important challenge, particularly in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic again, that has resulted in labor and material shortage in many parts of the world. And so this is really an opportunity as well as a challenge to invest in workers, invest in building up skills and making sure that working conditions are adequate to create more opportunity for better housing. Next slide, please. And so I will turn to Maria in a moment, but just to summarize the finding of the report, the construction sector has substantial output and employment multiplier effect. It can really have those broad economic benefits, while at the same time, the current sector shape employment for workers is really largely informal. Most workers have limited formal training, and on-the-job training is extremely important, but is not always well recognized and transferable when they want to change jobs. So construction offers this important first step into urban labor markets for migrants who move from rural areas to urban areas or relatively low educational outcome in urban areas. But we need to invest in workers and equipment. We need to improve worker safety and occupational health. And there's really a potential for greater inclusion of women in the sector. And I want to highlight that is an important equity aspect. In addition, we need to build economic strategy that really further support the the construction sector. I will now turn it to Maria to link those findings up to how we can rethink policy incentive in the housing and building construction sector. Next, please. Next. Okay.
Maria, you're on mute.
Should know that better as a teacher, but there we are. Okay, when we then summarize the findings of both of these reports, the one that shows the contribution of the housing sector to the GDP of a country and the importance of employment generation in the construction sector, we see that the next slide, we went back, I think.
One more slide.
Next, one more. Right. This is the last slide. I'm only coming in with the last concluding slide here. We have to, when we use them and we begin to look at the housing sector as a sector that should not be overlooked as an economic stimulus, certainly in the current downturn of the economy in so many countries, we have to make sure that the strategies that we develop to stimulate the housing sector are actually delivering what they need to deliver. And the mistake that is made in many stimulus packages that are developed around the globe in emerging markets is that very often the stimulus is focused on that part of the housing sector that is already working extremely well, is already very efficient, is already supplied extremely well. The challenge is to design these strategies for the underserved part of the market, mostly the affordable market, and focus very sharply all our stimulus efforts onto that market, the informal market, the not only ownership but rental housing, so that indeed we expand access to housing and we expand the market, the formal market for housing. And that is more challenging, of course, but that is where stimuli can get a lot better return in the economy, both on the employment side as well as on the economic growth side. So that's very important that we keep that in mind, that it is that the stimulus packages should be focused or should be very inclusive. Then the second major component that often goes wrong in stimulus policies is that they are very narrow in their scope. Often it is a stimulus that is provided through the interest rate on the mortgage sector or something like that. And the whole supply side of the chain, of the housing chain, is left out of the incentive structures. And that simply doesn't work. You can't only stimulate demand, and particularly for high income, and think that you have a broad impact on the overall economy. It just doesn't work that way. So we really need to understand what are the constraints on the supply side. Can the lenders expand lending? If not, for housing, whether it is microfinance loans or mortgage loans, it doesn't matter. Can they expand? If they can't, what can we do about it? What are the constraints to take away? Also, on the real supply side, the regulatory permitting environment requires a lot of improvements so that it doesn't take a long time to get approval. Certainly not when it is a stimulus package that wants to stimulate the economy now, because we are now in a crisis. We now have a downturn. So the policy actions have to be taken to facilitate the regulatory environment, the permitting structures, access to land, access to infrastructure, so that this machinery can actually begin to work efficiently and effectively. So the focus on short-term stimulus actions has to focus indeed on a comprehensive set of inputs into the housing market for the stimulus to be effective for particularly the affordable sector. Then the last is, of course, the conclusion of this construction report. If we focus attention, and you already have in the Philippines wonderful organizations that are well positioned to do this. I'm so impressed. I just learned about them, and they are panelists that come after Arthur and my presentation. But we have to really focus attention on the efficiency of the building sector. And that requires, again, comprehensive action, understanding where improvements can be made. If we can make the affordable housing sector work more efficiently, that has an enormous impact, not just on output, but on prices of housing. And prices are critical for the affordable segment, much more so than for the higher income segment of the housing market. So capacity building in this sector and so on and so forth is critical. And other panelists, I'm excited to tell you that we'll talk about these issues in the Philippines. So the conclusion of our work is that the cost of neglecting the housing sector in the package of economic measures to stimulate the economy are incredibly, and I call it unacceptably high. You cannot have a good stimulus package without focusing on the housing sector. And the benefits, the social and economic benefits of housing investment, as was already explained in the introduction, are huge. So we simply cannot afford to not pay attention to the housing and the housing construction sector in particular. And that, I think, are our remarks that hopefully can set up the next panelist very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Arthur and Maria. It's important to note how the study established the impact of the construction sector in employment, which presents the investment potential of construction for overall economic growth. More importantly, the study also revealed how residential construction, in particular, represents a potential win-win low to middle income countries, as it creates quality jobs while filling this massive void in affordable housing.
I agree, Hershey. Another important insight that I got from Arthur's presentation is that many of these jobs created by the construction sector also go to workers with lower levels of formal education, and these are relatively well-paying jobs compared to other employment options for workers with limited educational attainment. If you can imagine how much of an impact that has contributed to individuals with lesser income earning opportunities, and there's just so much manpower, there's so much market and inclusive business that's left untapped. And because the study covers such a global scale, I think it's also important for us to understand how to frame it in the Philippine setting. And so to help us frame it in the Philippine context of the study, I'd like to give the floor to the Philippine country lead of the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter, Mr. Jasan Katre. Mr. Jasan, what does this mean for the Philippines?
Thank you, Hein Hershey, and thank you, Arthur and Maria. I'll just be giving a few information to supplement what Arthur and Maria have said a while ago. in regards to the Philippine context. Like my colleague in Habitat Philippines, the director said that for every one job created in the housing, it results into two more job in the economy. Just to add to more data on that one, and it and as well connected to what Maria have said, that it's important to also look into the affordable housing segment and also the informal segment of such housing industry. So in 2016, our partner, the Center for Research and Communication, the Center for Research and Communication of the University of Asia in the Pacifics, together with the Subdivision and Housing Developers Association, conducted a study that is similar to what we have done right now. They have found out that for the Philippine economy, for every 1 peso spent on housing construction, this contributes to 3 pesos and 44 centavos to the economy. So the multiplier effect is big. Now, on the 3 pesos and 44 centavos contributed to the economy, 1 peso is from the housing industry itself, but 2 pesos and 44 centavos come from the construction workers' spendings by their households and by the construction workers employed by the housing supply chain. So not only is it contributing to their livelihoods or to employment, but really their spending is contributing a lot to the economy. That's why it's very important to look at the contribution of the construction workers themselves in a country's economy, especially in the Philippines, where there are a lot in the informal segment that is really basically undercounted as well. Unfortunately, because of COVID, last year when COVID hit the country, the most severely impacted sector of the economies are those in the construction business, and almost 700,000 of them lost their job last year. And by the end of last year, the construction segment contracted by almost 10%. Good thing that in the Philippines, construction is considered as an essential industry, so it is rebounding. Uh, it has suffered some job losses of when Delta hit the country, but with the resurgence, jobs are already coming back. As of the latest data, 100,000 have been added back to the economy in terms of job. But then again, most of those jobs are in big infrastructure projects, not so much in the affordable housing segment. So it is still one area that needs to be focused on in terms of economic recovery. Just would like to add those as supplementary data. Thank you, Ayn. Thank you, Hershey.
Thank you, Sir Jasan. And that concludes the first part of our program. For the next part, we will be hearing from our panel of reactors. Our first panelist to join Arthur, Maria, and Sir Jasan is Mr. Santiago Nola, Secretary General of the National Union of Building and Construction Workers, or NUBCW. Mr. Nolia also serves as a labor representative of the Construction Industry Tripartite Council, or CITC, and a CBA negotiator and paralegal. Established in 2001, the NUBCW was the first registered labor organization under the category of an industry union. Its vision is to build a world of works that is humane and egalitarian for Filipino workers and aims to promote and represent the interests of the workers, particularly in the building and construction industry, and established and maintained close relations with national and international organizations whose objectives are designed to protect and advance the workers' interests. Mr. Santi, magandang umaga po sa inyo, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Very good and introduction. Um, well, I'm Santiago Nolia. Just call me Santi for short. for the information of the guests and visitors here in our online forum. I am currently the Secretary General of NUBCW, the National Union of Building and Construction Workers. At the same time, I'm also sitting as a labor representative representing construction workers and the construction industry tripartite council. So, as a reaction to the report of Arthur and Maria, um, I have noticed that many construction involved in the uh, presentation are in low profile or lack of high education. That is one of my I have noticed. Second, according to the report, um, the construction industry is a male dominant industry, especially here in the Philippines. I think almost 95% or 96% of the workers engaged in construction industry is all male, and a very little percentage involving women. So I think we are addressing this matter here in the Philippines as the only labor union in the construction industry. We do a lot of trainings and seminars promoting equality and gender sensitivity of workers in the construction industry. So in the last 5 years of NUBCW, we did a lot of trainings like occupational safety and health, gender sensitivity, uh, um, skills training, and personality development to promote the growth development of each individual, of each construction workers. So we address this uh, observation in the report by conducting many trainings and seminars to promote equality. Like said in the report, 95% of the construction workers in the construction industry is a all male. So by way of responding it, we do a lot of skills training and development. Last last month, just last August and September, we partnered with the local government of Caloocan City here in National Capital Region and San Jose del Monte, Bulacan in Bulacan Province. We are partnering them to promote women and gender sensitivity and to empower women because not just said in the report, as said in the report, uh, construction industry is a male dominant. So we are promoting women and we are training more women to have equal opportunities, to have more employment for women, and to be more sensitive in the aspect of gender sensitivity. So yeah, that's the work of NUBCW here in the Philippines, and to promote more the equality and gender sensitivity and promotion of um, more employment for women. We also advocating this in the tripartite council as a labor representative in the construction industry tripartite council. Uh, I have proposed many resolutions and concerns involving workers, construction workers, especially women, because of the widening discrimination in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of religious belief and culture. So there were many past. There were like the occupational safety and health last 2019. Uh, it is already passed and legislated, the occupational safety and health law. So it's already a law in the Philippines. So NUBCW is one of the uh, supporter or a sponsor in pursuing this law. That is why we are very optimistic and we are very energized in pursuing health and safety amongst the construction workers.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Santi, for your insight. We'll talk probably more about more of your reactions. Actually, we're getting several really interesting questions from our audience as well. But before we go to the reaction and the additional questions, I also want to introduce our fellow reactor and speaker, Mr. Jesse Cubijano. Mr. Jesse Cubijano is Executive Director of the Primary Structures Educational Foundation, Incorporated, and the School of Knowledge for Industrial Labor, Leadership, and Service Incorporated, otherwise known as SKILLS. I just noticed that someone talked about lack of skilled workers, so maybe Mr. Jesse can help us out with that later on. So the Primary Structures Educational Foundation, Inc. is the corporate foundation of the primary group of builders. His roles at PSEFI include management of scholarship programs, administrative supervision, external relations, internal process innovations, and oversight of the School of Knowledge for Industrial Labor, Leadership, and Service. SKILLS is a technical vocational institute managed by PSEFI. A graduate of BA Political Science from the University of the Philippines, Cebu, Mr. Cubijano handled corporate social responsibility programs at the Philippine Business for Social Progress and the Aboitiz Group before joining PSEFI Skills. Beyond work, Jesse enjoys reading, collecting and selling books, art and travel, and his latest passions are manga and anime. Mr. Jesse, Mr. Cubijano, good morning. Thank you for joining our panel today.
Hi, Ayn. Good morning. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Is my signal and volume okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Sir
That's
Jesse.
cool. And good morning. Good morning from Cebu to everyone who's part of us in this learning session. As mentioned by Ayn, our organization is actually the corporate social responsibility expression and creating shared value advocacy of the primary group of builders. The organization is in the fields of construction, real estate development, health and lifestyle, logistics, and human capital development. And that's why in 2008, although the organization has been in existence since 1951, in 2008, the organization really formalized its intent to contribute to community development by way of employment and training, and at the same time, address talent shortage and academe industry mismatch by putting up a foundation, which is the Primary Structures Educational Foundation, wherein what we do really is provide academic and technical vocational education scholarship, particularly in the field of skilled trades like construction. So to make the approach sustainable, the organization set up a school, which is Skills, wherein we also provide a lot of trades in the community. Practically 100% of our students are scholars funded by private and government institutions. And what we do really is to push forward for that advocacy in construction and to ensure that it provides future for the youth, and at the same time really address the need of the industry for talent, and to bridge that mismatch between academe, what's produced by the academe, and the industry, what are the skills and the disciplines that are needed by the industry. The study by Arthur and Maria really resonates with what we are doing in the organization. from the perspective of both the school, skills, and organization primary group. What we do in the organization is we really provide an enabling environment for the professionals, for the skilled construction workers. What are these enabling environment? Number one is we encourage them to multi-skill. And by multi-skilling, to really acquire more certifications, that you become more reliable, and you become, you can also do entrepreneurship on your weekends if you could service your community. So that's multi-skilling. And we actually provide, we incentivize multi-skilling. The workers in our group who you are carpentry, masonry, plumbing, tile setting, electrical installation and maintenance, and maybe you also know how to operate a heavy equipment. We incentivize that by providing more compensation to more acquired skills. We also encourage productivity. So in fact, workers who are able to produce more or have greater outputs, they actually could earn more. And we've institutionalized a industry certification program together with the private sector and government agencies. We call it the ACAS, or the Assessment, Certification, and Accreditation System, wherein a person, very particularly a senior high school graduate, could have that certification in order for that person to have more competitive role in the industry. I like what Nola said earlier, that the construction environment has improved right now, and we in the organization really ensures the health and safety of our workers and our professionals in the construction sites, especially during right now in the time of the pandemic. And one of the advocacies that's really very close to our hearts is the mainstreaming of women in the construction sector. And we do this, in fact, the primary group has buildings that's maintained by women. We call them the handy women, wherein one woman is certified in masonry, plumbing, tile setting, carpentry, and electrical installation and maintenance. They know how to operate heavy equipment. And when we prepared them for this role in the construction sector, initially it was met with a lot of resistance from the men, because as mentioned, it's a very male-dominated industry. So mainstreaming women in the construction space also entails a lot of policies and providing benefits and protection for the women so they could feel safe and empowered and protected in that space. So initially, that's what we do at Skills at the primary group in terms of really pushing forward in providing a safe space and elevating the dignity of the skilled construction professional.
All right. Thank you very much, Sir Santi and Sir Jesse. It's really heartening to know that there are, as Maria said a while ago, there are well-positioned organizations that can respond to these opportunities and to these needs, because there's no shortage of jobs, there's no shortage of manpower. So I'd like to invite Arthur and Maria at this point. How do you think the government, national and local, and the private sector, how do you think they should respond to the findings? I mean, how important are the findings to Philippine economic recovery, especially from COVID-19?
Go ahead, Maya. You're muted.
Ladies first, yeah.
Ladies first. Like in the construction industry at the moment. Special stimulus. Unfortunately, although I have worked in the Philippines on and off many years, I haven't worked recently in the Philippines. I have always been incredibly impressed with the infrastructure that exists in the Philippines for affordable housing. So you already have a whole group of builders, developers that focus on social housing or social developers. I remember speaking to the network, and it has a name that I now cannot remember, but of social developers. And I found that incredibly helpful. So the like Jesse's organization, I did not know about that, and I am very intrigued when we spoke yesterday about this. And so there are already networks, there are institutions that focus precisely on the segment of the housing market that now really need focused attention, because your main demand is in the affordable sector. It is no longer at the high income level. That is well taken care of. People can get mortgages, people can go to the formal market and acquire a house. So I'm very heartened that you already have these institutions oriented towards the affordable segment. And therefore, it is possible to really analyze what more can be done. What are the precise pain points, as we call them? Policy, regulatory issues that might facilitate the output, the efficiency of the sector, and indeed moving to scale in that affordable market. And I think the Philippines is, because of the government's historic focus on the housing sector, it is well positioned to now look at what are these leftover issues, the core issues that need to be addressed, so that the affordable housing sector can indeed reach the scale that it requires to really take care of the poor housing conditions that still so many people live in there. Also, the other main sector that is a very promising sector in the Philippines, I think, is your retrofitting. Your country is very prone to typhoons, to climate problems. And that whole area of strengthening the existing housing stock, retrofitting it so that it is more resilient in the increasing climate issues that the country will face, offers an enormous opportunity. And I'm sure, I'm not, I don't know this, Jesse, but is your organization, for instance, and I'm also asking this from Senti, are you focused on that retrofitting, the strengthening of a lot of the buildings? I suppose you are.
Thank you for that, Maria. And right now, what we do is we are actually one of the business of the primary group is really the real estate development. And we say real estate, you really have houses out there that caters to the lower income sector as well as to the higher income sector. But in terms as far as the business is concerned, that is really more towards the real estate development. But we have two services that are actually in line towards what you are saying, like retrofitting, especially in the case of the Philippines, wherein the behavior of people in the community is more on incremental building. The two areas that we are doing with this is really, number one, integrating construction training education in the senior high school level. So here in our program in senior high school, if you enroll with us and it's grade 11 and 12, that's like 16 to 18 years old here in the Philippines. When you finish your 2-year education, you have there your academic diploma, wherein that means you are able to perform, to comply with the academic requirements. But at the same time, you have multiple NC2s already. So that means when you finish senior high school, you are able to have like 1,000 hours of immersion in the industry, enabling you to have certifications in carpentry, masonry, plumbing, and tile setting. So that means that an individual at that age level could actually provide service to the community by way of maybe entrepreneurship, providing services, or maybe providing on-call services to companies or to houses. But one of the things that we are also doing, one of our companies have a product called a Light Strong. So it's an eco block. It's an innovation of your regular concrete hollow block. It's more expensive upfront because of the cost of the block, but in the long term, it is lesser, it is cheaper because you don't need, you don't need all those finishing. It's in itself, the block is already complete. You just have to pile it up in its, you don't, the cost of putting it up is lesser compared to the concrete hollow block. The finishing cost is lesser. And one of the positive attributes that we look at it is its resistance to fire, and also its ability to be an insulator, wherein the heat of the day does not affect much the temperature in the room. So I guess that's also one of the things that we need to communicate to the communities, to the incremental building, is that you also need to take a look at the long-term cost, and we can do that by looking at better products, more innovative construction products.
All right. Thank you very much, Sir Jesse. We wanted to give a couple of questions. We want to open the floor for the audience to ask a couple of questions. Let's see. We received one from Mr. Joel Fernandez, and I'd like to invite all of the speakers to give us a few short statements on this. It says, true fact, there is an urgent need to wake up the sleeping person inside each one that is ready and willing to have altruistic, social-civic mindedness. The willingness to take care of the environment while taking care of each one's economic needs. This is only satisfied when everyone is involved, that all are under the benevolence of a supreme being. And it's basically a call to action for everyone that's involved. That's everyone's disposition to take action. So I suppose a good way to sort of bring that call to action to everyone who has the voice. Can we ask the panelists, what's your call to action? Like, if you are going to give your statement to everyone that's involved, to everyone that's participated and has given their time and energy into learning more about inclusive business, untapped markets, what's your call to action to the audience? I'll probably start off with Arthur.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I think the call for action, going back to Maria's point about affordable housing being that segment that requires really attention, is there will be resources that are needed. We can't do that without the government putting resources, but building up the argument for the government to really see that housing is that building block for society as a critical infrastructure from which households are able to access services is one way, I think, where we can mobilize around it. In addition, what we try to do with the report is also to show the government across the world that housing is not just spending a lot of money for building housing, but is also a way to create well-paying job with skills. And so that there's a productive element to the housing sector, is not just an expenditure. So that's those two things I think will help in making housing a higher priority on those lists of all those demands that they are facing, and scarce funding to allocate.
I agree. Thanks very much, Arthur. Maria?
Yeah, I very, very much am in agreement with Arthur here, that too many governments, whether it is at the local government level or at the central government level, and you need both to work together, see housing really only as an expenditure, particularly affordable housing. When you go to local governments, they see the informal areas where they are not collecting service charges. They are not collecting taxes. They see it as an enormous cost post. While if they would facilitate at the local government level access to land, access to infrastructure, so that more affordable housing could be built in their municipalities, the tax base would increase. It would be very good for the local economy. And those facts are often overlooked, particularly, I would say, at the local government level, because so many of the services have to be provided by local government. And they see affordable housing as, or the informal housing, housing for poor people or whatever you want to call it, really as only a cost. Well, if we can make them see that it is really, that it can stimulate the local economy particularly and their tax base, that would hopefully change their mind. And they have it in their power to really facilitate formal development for affordable housing through land policies, through permitting, the regulatory environment. So that would be I would focus a bit more on local government, because at the central government level, you already have a lot of good institutions. You have PAC-IPIC for lending. You have a lot of infrastructure. So I would focus my comments on local government and local communities to organize and lobby their local governments.
Thanks, Maria. Sir Jesse?
Yeah, I would like to outline my call to action with three things. First one is change of mindset. The second one is inclusion. And the third one is the personal values. I would like to first highlight change of mindset. We need really the support of the government and the private sector to really help influence the youth that there is really a future in construction. It no longer is the dangerous, difficult, and dirty space that it used to be, because there are improvements in the work conditions, compensations have improved, technologies have improved, and there is a growth career path in it. So we need the parents to really influence their kids. We need the teachers to influence their kids. There's nothing wrong with still going to college, but the world has also changed right now. There is a future, there is an opportunity in construction. And one of the things that Jessan and I and the team are working on right now, last year we took advantage of the pandemic by bringing construction into the digital space. So we built up a learning management system called skills-ph.com. It's your learning management system for you to access blended learning about basic construction that can be accessed through your smartphone, through your tablet, through your computer. And I think this is one of our ways to really also attract the digital youth, that what are the opportunities available here. So that one, I would say, the change in mindset. The second item that I would like to include here is inclusion. And when I say inclusion, it's both for gender and professional inclusion. I noticed here in the chat box that there are mention about inclusion of the LGBT, and there's a very wonderful story that I would like to share. Over the past several days, I have been opening our new batch of training programs. It's focused on plumbing and C2. We have a batch of 20 youth from the urban and rural side of Cebu who participated. And surprisingly, of the 20 male students in the batch, 2 are openly in the LGBT sector. And they really like, in terms of they dress like ladies. And what I found fascinating in the class is that, number one, they lead the group. They have this force. They're able to engage the group. They're able to make their cohorts follow them. And the second thing is that I never felt during the entire session that they were excluded. There is acceptance, and this is a cohort composed of 18 to 24 years old, and I appreciate that age segment already has that kind of sensitivity. And hopefully that the two guys and the entire team will survive the program. But it gave me hope having that kind of cohort, having that kind of composition in the group. And still, of course, related in the inclusion, let's strive for bringing the dignity of the skilled construction worker. And we are doing that. Really, the government is doing that. It's mainstreamed in our senior high school education, in the courses of TESDA, in even the career path that's provided by the Commission on Higher Education. We need to recognize really that construction is a skilled profession, and we need the cooperation of the private in the public sector to really work on that. But lastly, this one is more focused on the personal values. What I've noticed in the cohorts that we've overseen in July and this October, and even in our senior high school program, a lot of our students arrive late. We say we start at 8 a.m. Our call time is 8 a.m. We eventually start at 9 or 10 a.m. So we thought, okay, maybe 8 a.m. is too early. So we set it at 9. They arrive at 9:30 or 10. So clearly there's something wrong out there. There's a generational issue or challenge out there. I asked our trainer, what do we do? Are we going to sanction? Are we supposed to be angry at them? And the trainer told me, just we cannot do that, because the dropout will increase. It will repel them. We have experiences like Cebu was on lockdown for the entire month of August, and what happened was we do the sessions virtually. So when they attend the virtual session, they're still just in bed. They just woke up. They're eating while we're having the session, or they will just log out and then not come back in the session. So I think these are very important issues that if we would really like to really engage the youth in construction, engage the youth in the skilled trades, values is very important. Commitment is very important. Patience and perseverance is very important that we really need to inculcate. I guess that's a lot: mindset, inclusion, and values. Thank you.
That's a lot, but all very relevant, Sir Jesse. Thank you so much. Sir Jason.
Yeah, just a quick thought to share. Other than what Jesse has already shared, what Maria has said about the importance of local governments, very true, especially come January when the Mandanas ruling takes effect and more resources are available for local governments. Just would like to add as well that the Philippines is about to enter another election season. So it's very important to, tell our candidates to look at housing as a very important, not only as a health, but also as an economic contributor for the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Jasan, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. I do agree that the role of the local government is really crucial in mobilizing affordable housing, and I hope that this is something that the candidates will look into in the coming elections, as well as, of course, the population, the citizens, when they are voting for their preferred candidate. So Sir Jess's input is also very insightful, and I agree that the change of mindset starts at home. So we hope that families and parents will also start upbringing their children into looking into other options on top of the normal profession that we encourage our children to take on. And we also would like to acknowledge all the questions and input of our audience. We do agree that the construction sector should be inclusive to all genders. And for all the other questions that were not addressed due to limited time, allow us to get back to all of you through a different medium. So now let us move on to the closing of our program.
All right, thanks very much, Hershey. To close the session, may I please invite the Global Director for Financial Inclusion and Capital Markets at Habitat's Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter, Mr. Naeem Rezwani. Having led projects in multiple geographies across the globe, our guest and his team are focused on addressing systemic barriers in the housing finance ecosystem with a lens of climate, gender, and technology. Welcome, Mr. Naeem Rezwani.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it's an honor to be given an opportunity to give the closing remarks. Firstly, to my colleagues at Habitat for Humanity, Ms. Godstretz Alfonso and Mr. Jason Carter, the co-sponsors, Ms. Meryl and Gabby of FairBuilding Network, the speakers and authors of the Letter Up report, Arthur Collin and Professor Maria Hooksmith, and our reactors from the industry, Mr. Cubijano and Mr. Nola. Good morning once again, and thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule to share your views and expertise on an important topic with us today. To the rest of the guests of this event, thank you for joining us. I would like to close the session with a few points to take back with us. First is about calling attention to the impact of the construction industry and in effect, the labor force on the wider economy. Our work at Habitat for Humanity in providing decent shelter for everyone is made more meaningful and sustainable with the support of all sectors involved. And that includes the expert speakers and guests joining us today. Collaborating and working with various market actors is central to our work, and bringing a meaningful insight through platforms like this is important in understanding and promoting the complex issues around housing and the wider construction industry, which otherwise doesn't receive the same limelight. Therefore, we continue to advocate housing and hold these events to think through how we might work better to impact and support low-income homeowners and their families in need of decent shelter. We keep amplifying our message that the construction industry, particularly home building across all economic segments, is a real game changer in rebuilding the country's economy with its often overlooked ability to provide jobs to communities. We wish to prioritize housing in countries that are still working towards building back economies weakened by the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in a world where more than 1.6 billion people still lack adequate shelter. As the country is recovering and adapting to the pandemic, we should look forward to investments to pour in from various sectors. This brings me to my second point, which is about calling for investment in the construction labor industry. Philippine Housing Resolution number 1677 suggests that housing production has a huge multiplier effect on the economy. For every peso spent on construction, an added value equivalent to 1,923 pesos, or about $38, is created as it circulates through the other economic activities. Additionally, for every job created in the sector, 2 more jobs are created in the economy. This further provides evidence of the huge investment potential that the sector brings to the country. In a study conducted in 2022 by the National Union of Building and Construction Workers, represented here by Mr. Nola, 1 out of 10 workers employed are in the construction industry. This accounts for about 4.7 million individuals working in the sector. Although industry sources point out that the official statistics do not include the substantial informal employments, and that the actual weight of the sector in the labor force is significantly higher than the official figures. You could imagine the untapped market opportunity to serve this segment. We need investments, both from the public and the private sector, to promote an enabling environment that allows ease of operations in this area. The multiplier effect of the construction sector, particularly for the residential building, has tremendous impact, not only in the economic recovery and the increased livelihood of Filipinos, but also on how it could potentially improve the lives of homeowners, particularly those who are incrementally building, and the laborers and artisans they hire to build their houses. We need to explore innovative ways to build better, safer, and with speed. This brings me to my third point and the last point, which is about calling for innovation in the construction labor industry. The construction labor industry is vibrant, and we at Habitat for Humanity recognize that there are opportunities to influence the market to become more inclusive in the way products, services, and information are accessed by laborers, the artisans across the country. This perhaps can be proven by the instance through our partnership with the School of Knowledge for Industrial Labor, Leadership and Services Skills, a leading technical vocational institution in the Visayas region represented by Mr. Kubijano. We also recognize that the value of design services from the architects, engineers, and even supervisors and skilled laborers as critical allied function in the market. We'll continue to look for and partner with various market actors to introduce practical, commercially viable, and substantial solutions at scale to meet the housing demand of people who need decent and safe shelter. The Philippines continues to endure the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic that further worsens the already existing housing crisis in the country. Sadly, the most impacted from these dual crises are low-income communities who have less access to opportunities to overcome these challenges. But if we continue to work together and push for inclusive, innovative, and mutually beneficial solutions across the housing ecosystem, all our work will have a more meaningful impact on the communities we serve the most, resulting in just not sustainable, but also profitable solutions for both the private sector and the communities that are involved. Let's start with focusing more attention, investment, innovation towards housing. Let's work with the government and other policymakers in designing inclusive policies, because the enabling environment would push for the results to come to the limelight. And let's continue to improve the working conditions and training of construction workers so they can develop in a more sustainable, equitable way. Let's also not forget that by providing more jobs and opportunities and safer working environment for construction workers, their families are also the beneficiaries of such opportunities. On behalf of Habitat for Humanity's Terwilliger Center, let me once again acknowledge our speakers, guests, partners, FairBuilding Network, and Habitat for Humanity Philippines for making this online forum a success. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for that, Naeem. For now, we request all the panelists again to turn on your cameras for a quick photo op. Okay, someone please take the photo. Okay, I'll take it now. 1, 2, 3. There you go. I got it. Miss Ayn?
All right, thanks very much, Hershey. Of course, to everyone who joined today's discussion, thank you. We would also like to hear from you. Please participate in our quick survey and share your thoughts about the event to help us improve virtual events like this in the future. To participate, please scan the QR code that is being flashed on your screens right now, or click the link to the survey on the chat box. Thank you. We hope to see you again on our next sessions. This is Ayn Rand Parel.
And this is Hershey Gabby, and this is A Ladder Up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Maria, Jessie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Aditi.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.